You are listening to Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 33, Incorporating Social Play into Your Games. Today we talk about adding social play into your games. We talk about how to add social play and challenges into your existing games. We give examples of how to incorporate this into different genres and explain why you may want to add these elements into your game. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and in Georgia, he'll politic his way to the top of the ladder, Jared.
Hey, everybody. I will politic my way up the ladder. Become king.
How you doing today, Jared?
Not bad, not bad. A nice actual day off. I actually took the whole day off. I said I'm not going to go into the office. I will call them and check in on them. I will use this thing called a telephone to do my walking for me.
Whoa. Here, slow down with the technology there, Jared.
I know, God forbid. God forbid. So I called in and it's, I am learning to be better at being hands off and trusting my people to do the job. So
it's strange you're doing that better in your professional life and in your gaming life.
Yes, I am. A little more hands off, a little less. Oh my God! But yeah, no, it's a nice summer day here in Georgia, so it's like 97 degrees outside, so I'm melting.
Yeah, if anyone's wondering, Jared has been back and forth. We've talked about it several times, but Jared's been back and forth through Georgia, and so that's why we had to get this Zoom account so we could start doing these Zoom meetings and continue bringing all you wonderful people this great podcast.
Wonderful content. Yeah, but it's worked out for our purposes, you know. So for those of you who are thinking about starting up your own podcast, don't be afraid of using this as a medium. I mean. But then again, we have the brilliant mind of Aaron who makes it all work. So,
and I've got the great tones of Jared and the experience of Jared to be able to lend to this podcast.
You've got the years of mistakes. Experience is a nice way of saying years of mistakes and learning from them.
Which is why you should learn from us and level up your gaming. I don't think we've done that in a little while. So
we haven't. Level up your gaming. So what's the topic today besides Jared's social or political ladder climbing?
Our topic today is incorporating social play into your games. So awesome. We as a group tend to run, I'd say, heavier on the social side versus combat side of oriented gaming. We tend to do more social stuff, and you've probably heard us talk about our investigation game here, which is a very social game. So, Jared, how would you tell us a little bit about the social game?
So, the social game, what I want to first off do is break the misconception of a social game. When people hear social games, they think, okay, it's going to be a bunch of people standing around at a cocktail party, and you have to listen in on who doesn't like who, and thus I find out who doesn't like who, and then I start helping them overcome that person, that it's political ladder climbing. And a social game does not necessitate that sort of environment. A social game can be an investigation game. We have found that a social element is a huge part of an investigation game. It's going out and talking to people. It's instead of the secrets are always contained within the book or they're written on a scroll, it's going and talking to a person. So it's engaging with people. And that's really what a social. So even your quests and adventures can really be very socially based. But, you know, before we get into that, I kind of have a caveat. You kind of have to make sure that this is, if you want to if you want to challenge yourself as a storyteller and say, you know what, I really want to try to add some more social into my games. You really got to make sure that you got the right group for it. Because remember our golden rules. Are you having fun? Are your players having fun? And if you got a bunch of players that that they just like to go rip shit riot and use the E-Web blaster on everything, and that's what makes them have fun, and that's what makes them really enjoy it. You should not focus a game totally around a social center. You should start off with maybe a social scene within the game.
I agree with that.
Yeah, just the.
Sorry, to your point there, actually, you brought this up, I think, in our last podcast that we did, which was, challenge yourself to add a little bit of social action, even if your players love the rip-roaring shit. It doesn't have to be this great politic situation here, but maybe challenge them to fish for a little bit more information out of the quest giver. Give them a little bit more flavor in that piece of the adventure and see if anyone latches onto it.
Yeah, test the waters, so to speak. If you're like, my guys do really like action, but I've never done social, go ahead, run that scene, maybe that session that's more social inclined, and ask for that constructive feedback at the end. Hey guys, I ran a bit more of a social this night. What'd you guys think? And remember, you want that constructive criticism. It's going to be corrective in nature. You'll either get corrective or confirming. So you're going to have people that are like, hey, this was fantastic. I actually had a whole lot of fun. And then you might have the people that are like, this just wasn't my cup of tea. I was bored all night. Okay, cool. That's corrective feedback. Let me go back to the drawing board, annex the social out of my group, or maybe keep it contained only to a scene rather than a session, and certainly not an entire game. So, making sure of the right alley. Now, you might ask, well, I got my bard in my group. I've got my diplomat in my Star Wars game. I've got the smooth talker in my modern game, the business savvy guy. And they're almost always left out. And this actually, we're going to direct you back to an earlier podcast about spotlights on certain character groups. And really what it is just making sure that every session has a spotlight. Not every session. It might be between sessions, might 1 or 2 sessions. But you don't want to wait in 3 sessions or 4 sessions for them to get a spotlight. No. 1, maybe 2. You got to have that moment at least in that second night because they're not feeling the love. You got to remember they need that love. So you're going to find a way to bring something to the bard. If the bard is completely non-combat, and I'm talking your true bard of like, all I do is run around and buff people by plucking at my ukulele. I'm sorry. Bards, I don't get it. But then again, I'm a White Wolf guy, been a White Wolf guy, done and like Star Wars. And like the diplomat, I'm like, diplomat class. Because really my idea of social and bringing social into a game is actually a very new evolution for me. And it actually started when on Reddit, I used to help other storytellers. I was on a storyteller subreddit. And one person asked, how do I bring politics into my game? And I'll get into that a little bit more when a little later, because I have some tips for how to work it into certain game classes. So he challenged my brain. And when he challenged my brain, he challenged me to level up my gaming. And I started coming up with ideas for political and social, blah, 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 blah. So back to it, spotlight. So make sure your bard does have that capability. Make sure your diplomat has that capability. There are so many situations that require just a little bit of gravitas. Did I say that right?
Sure. We're going to go with that.
Gravitas. So, and how do I enforce the gravitas? I have a group of warriors right behind the guy, right? So for an example, this is, I can't use examples because I want to use examples later, but no, I'm going to use it. Sci-fi. I've got a group of Jedi behind me. And, you say, well, everything can be solved through lightsabers. If I've learned through one thing through Star Wars, everything comes down to lightsabers. Even at the beginning of the Phantom Menace, we've got 2 Jedi negotiators. And what the Nemoians do? They're like, dude, they're Jedi. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to cut our heads off. See, Jedi are a threat. the thing is when it comes down to any social or any sort of thing, what you need to have is overwhelming repercussions for not choosing the social route. So, for example, I need a critical engine part for my starship. The hyperdrive has died. I can't engage someone in a pod race. Pod racing. I have to negotiate with the money that I have.
Of course, Jared is using one of the worst Star Wars episodes for most of his example here. We're surely going to get some shit for this.
Shit on this one. You know what, Star Wars fans? You don't like it? TFB, okay? I'm just saying Star Trek was better. Star Trek was better. Because not everything was handled by freaking lightsabers. Oh, we're here to negotiate. You're going to do what I say now? So you have to make sure that the barrels of the guns won't work. The lightsaber won't work. If we threaten this Numidian with my lightsaber, I don't know where our hyperdrive part is in his huge freaking junkyard. I have no clue. It's up to the Jedi Counselor to be like, you want to give us the part. You want to show us where it is. Or my personal love, he's a Nemoidian, or I think that's what he was. Whatever, the little flying guy with the wings, the fluff guy. He was immune to Jedi mind tricks. There are plenty of alien species that are clearly immune to Jedi mind tricks. And of course, they're in trade. And of course, they've got the part. It gives that spotlight moment. Everything comes down to when constructing a social scene for your social player, or a larger social scene for your group to kind of test them and see how they'll adapt and see if they look at it as a new and fun challenge, is overwhelming consequences on the other side. So if you have your group that, man, we're a group of murked up mercenaries who've got, we got the night vision goggles and we got the M4s and the blah, 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 blah. The thing is that they have to have a larger army on the other side, or there has to be some sort of larger consequence on the other side. If I start pulling off rounds at a dinner, a diplomatic dinner, okay, the police are going to come. And it doesn't matter how good your mercenaries are or what kind of firepower they're bringing, the police will eventually meet force with force. So the thing that you have to realize is that there has to be overwhelming consequences. So you guys mess this up, you will not get the part, period. It's not going to happen. There are no other hyperdrives on this planet for some odd reason. I don't take that back a little bit. But
go back and listen to our consequences in game episode. This is a good time for you to find the right consequences to apply if, social actions are not taken to negotiate for the hyperdrive part. And again, there are other ways that you can get the hyperdrive part, but maybe now you're at a shootout with the police and you're wanted by the Galactic Council of Police. I don't know.
Green Lantern Corps. They're coming for you. I'm just saying Green Lantern's one of them.
The other thing that I want to point out, though, with your
Aaron's like shutting down the DC right now.
The other thing I want to point out with your example there, which is let your diplomat shine. Don't just let your diplomat shine by rolling their really good roll to win the part. Okay, if they choose to use the roll, allow them to use the roll. But if they wow you and you're having a conversation with them and you go, oh, that sounds pretty legit, I'll give you the part, or we'll exchange the part for, this money, or, whatever your negotiation is. If they actually have a negotiation with you, one of the skills that you need to develop as a GM is the ability to talk with your players and fit into the role of the NPC there. And, know where the breaking points and the boundaries are for that NPC, to be able to have a negotiation or a talk with that player. If the player does wow you, you need to be able to say, I'm not going to make you roll, or I'm going to give you an insane modifier on that roll because you did such a good job, if you really wish to have them do the roll. But really what I would say is make sure that you kind of have a little bit of kind of house ruling here, or a little bit of GM sense to be able to say, well, they actually did a very good job of convincing me, and that sounds like a convincing argument, so I'm not going to make you roll to get the hyperdrive in this situation. You did it. You already did your job in earning the hyperdrive based upon your arguments or your negotiation skills to me, the GM. That's a win to your player who really wants to play in the social game itself.
Yep. And my last point about the consequences thing is make the consequences obvious, because especially if you've got the one social character, the diplomat, and the group of Jedi, make it obvious, because the group of Jedi, trust me, are going to be like, we should just whip out the lightsabers right now. Just start womp womp, and just start taking people out. You have to make them aware of, like, hey, there are security cameras. Hey, he's got laser barred doors that lightsabers just can't burn through. Help it along with small details like that. You notice the 1,700 soldiers sitting in the back room playing poker. Just to help guide your physical characters away from screw it, we're just going to jump over the counter and beat him half to death and take the hyperdrive part. Just make sure that those boundaries are known for your players that aren't looking for the social. Now, hopefully your players know each other well enough to be like, and they know you well enough to be like, this is a diplomatic point. We should really let our diplomat handle this, and let them go into it.
Usually you've got that one player who throws the wrench in the spokes and ruins everybody's day.
they try to, but you are God as a GM, and don't allow that opportunity. If the guy's like, I'm going to whip out my lightsaber, have the negotiator laugh and hit the buzzer door that closes all the laser grids that he can't burn through with a lightsaber, and he's going to be like, so you want to talk now? Don't let that player ruin that spotlight moment, because that's a spotlight moment for your other player to let him bring joy. And now he not only gets to negotiate for a part, he gets to negotiate for the group's life, because those laser beams, I can move them in, cut you in half. Sorry, that's very epic if you're looking at me. So back to so that's my last point of consequences. Make sure the consequences are obvious, that if they don't use their social person or they don't use gravitas, the consequences will be overwhelming to them. It's not going to be a good time. It's not going to be even a fun time. It's going to be a bad time. So the next thing that I want to bring up when talking about social games is creating the web of social connections. So when I create a game, so I'm right in the process of creating another one of our investigation games, and I'm having a blast. It's like a waterfall of creativity. I'm just like, so one of the things that I do, and this is kind of my little trick with NPCs, and it's been so helpful, and I've developed it over the last 2 years. So when I create an NPC, I create a section called information. So what they will have is, I imagine my NPC. All right, I watch documentaries. I watch way too many documentaries. I love them. I really like learning. Go figure. The former teacher likes learning.
The former history teacher, man. What about that?
Who never does? He likes learning shit. Sorry. So one thing that I do is I imagine my NPC sitting in front of a black background. They get up on a stool, and they can't hurt the documentarian, but it's a documentarian asking them questions I anticipate my players will ask. And then I actually write out the response. Whether or not I read these responses verbatim, right to my players when they ask them, I might improvise. I might just use that to get a feeling. And what it not only develops is it develops the starts of connections. Who else was in the room that night? Who else was sipping their coffee? Who else ordered from the restaurant? They have to know each other, and that web of connections starts branching out. And then I develop the next NPC that they saw. Who do they know? It's like a connectivity web of who knows who knows what. And it's a very detailed one, and it's very fluid because it comes through social interaction. Now, to pepper in that social interaction, I also create a little bit of a how do they feel about that person? And I don't write it in like Johnny hates Krista. No, because I use my format of documentarian and subject. So it'll be like, did you see Krista at that bar that night? And be like, I freaking hate Krista. Why would I care if she was there? Because that's the response somebody who hates Krista would give. I don't care. Come on, was Krista there? Yeah, of course I saw Krista. You know, have your players need to pull information because it makes your NPCs so much more lively when they're, you know, when you got someone being like, I hate Krista, I don't talk about Krista, I don't look at Krista, so I don't know if Krista was there. Come on, was Krista? We know that you were looking for Krista because you like fighting with Krista. Yeah, Krista was there. Why didn't you fight with her that night? Well, her boyfriend was there. Oh, okay. So now we have another person that we can examine. It starts creating this huge web. And I mean, honestly, I can fall into that web and it just wrap myself up in a warm, webby blanket of enjoyment because now my players have so many routes to go because the boyfriend is going to remember that the girl who hates Krista was there.
We could do a whole podcast.
I could do a whole podcast
on how to connect NPCs if like there's ever a desire for you to really want to know how we do our investigation games. Jared's pulling back a little bit of the curtain on this, but man, I mean we can go pretty in depth on how you connect different characters.
Yes.
There. But I think one of the other things too, and we sort of touched on this in the NPCs episode, so I'm going to direct people to go back in time. It was around episode 15 or so. We talked about improving your NPCs. This is one of the ways to do that, is to think about them as though they're being asked these questions as a documentarian. And we're like smallest details that you can do is what information do they know, even if you don't want to give them the response they might give. Make sure that they have that personality so you know if somebody does ask them a question, they're going to respond in a surly way, or they're a jovial fella, or something like that, so you know kind of how to act out as that NPC and respond appropriately, even if you haven't done the insane prep that Jared does, because Jared's a little insane.
Nuts. But it also, by doing this, you bring flavor to those social situations, because, you know, we talked in our combat podcast about like how you can talk about the drywall blowing to smithereens in slow motion. You can talk about the swing of the heavy club contacting armor. Oh my God, those groovy details that just make your combat heavy players salivate. This is what makes your social players salivate. Oh my God, I am talking to a king who's lost his way, you know? So to speak of web of connections, the next thing that you need to think about is access. So access is crucial in a social game, because if you always put too many barriers between your social person and what they need to get to, you know, you might run into the problem of the other players becoming frustrated, may not want to engage in that situation because they got to go to see this person, and then they got to go see this person to meet that person, and this person to meet that person. And some of your battle-hardened players might get a little weary. So again, we go back to spotlighting. Remember, your combat-oriented people need a good fight. At least, you know, once a night. Give them something. And actually, it was funny. In our last game, I had planned a social battle. My players, I never had to use it because I attempt to create at least one encounter per night. So if I plan for a game to go about 8 nights, I plan about 8 different conflicts. So pre-planned, just ones that I can pull out of the rabbit. For example, one for my last players was they were going to take a cab somewhere. Or drive somewhere, and they were going to get hit, and the person was going to blame them. They're the ones who ran the light, and it's a social joust because the cops are going to show up, and the cops are going to be like, "What happened?" It creates a social conflict that allowed my talker, who at that time was Brian, to manipulate the cops, get him to be the spotlights, get the cops to wave off on the guys, and take away the cab driver, or at least give the cab driver a ticket. It's not a huge conflict, but it's conflict nonetheless. It's drama, as long as you bring it, because my cab driver was going to be very gregarious, very, very gregarious. So levels of access is going back to levels of access. For example, if you want to create, if you've decided my game, you know, we did a session of social and they liked it, or we did a scene and my team, actually everyone really liked it. And then we did a session, and everyone really liked it. And then we did, they said, hey, let's do more of a political game. And you said, no problem. I've been gearing you up for it. And so here we go. We're going to create our political game. In your political game, access is key. If your characters can't access the heart of the conversation, and they're always on the periphery, they are removed from that spotlight. So you have to make sure there's some critical way for them to get access. What do they have that nobody else in that environment has? And that's something that Aaron and I intend on talking to in a future podcast, is talking about how to keep your characters always in that spotlight. They have to be that critical group. So I won't go too heavily into that, but they need to have the access keys in. When I was younger and less experienced, so instead of really taking the hard path, for example, the vampire game, the Vampire the Masquerade, has a very rigid social structure, a hierarchy, if you will. So I almost always made my players, they were, so let's say that there's princes of every city, because there are. Above those princes are groups called Justicars and Archons. They are above, and they're regional. So, my characters would always be the children of regional Archons or Justicars, and that's what will give them access. That's easy access. More complex examples of access would be for a vampire, they are the children of somebody who's very wealthy, who brings the prince a lot of money. So I have to welcome in my social circle, otherwise, because that's the fun thing about vampire, is a lot of people don't think about it this way. I can move. If my prince is being a jerk and taking 50% of whatever I earn, adios, muchacho. I'm moving to Bermuda. I got money. I'm a millionaire. I will find a way to move. People will find a way to leave a bad environment. It's only natural. So whenever I experience and I did a lot of LARPs where almost every prince was a tyrannical jerk who only ruled through fear. Because it's a LARP, unfortunately, you're kind of stuck doing what the storyteller gives you. If you're doing this as a small tabletop game, don't think for 1 second that your players won't be like, so we're moving this game to Switzerland. Anybody? Switzerland? And everyone's like, yeah, why not Switzerland? Sprechen Sie Deutsch. And then suddenly your players have just officially given the big thumbs down to your game because of your tyrannical prince dictator, and they have moved on. So really, there's many ways to give people access and connections. I encourage all the storytellers and dungeon masters and game masters to get creative with why access has to be given, because social ladders are very complex. It could be the friend of someone's mistress, and the last thing we want is that mistress telling the friend's wife that they're together. So I'm going to give his little group of bodyguards access to my social circle because the mistress otherwise is going to tell somebody. Social things are very, very complex, and they're beautiful when masterfully done. So take your time with them. Enjoy the little backstories. Really get creative, because trust me, if you're a storyteller really looking to up your game, God bless you that you'll listen to the combat one. And you can talk about and blowing up of drywall and creating John Woo with his dubs. That's great. You want to up your level? Up your social game. Who talks to who? Who speaks with who? So, and that kind of rolls it into examples of social in 3 different environments. I'm going to take away the far future, okay? Because I already told you about Nemoidians. I think he was a Nemoidian. It's going to bug me now. All the Star Wars guys are going to be jumping down my throat. But you know what? Star Trek.
You quoted the worst of the movie.
Yeah, well, hey, they of whatever 9 movies they've created, one was shoddy. I'm just saying. Star Trek, we had the same thing. Okay. Enterprise, terrible. We'll admit it. We don't know why you guys.
You're example is valid, but I'm just
Thank you. Yeah, way to get me back on track. So, Dark Ages. You might be like, dude, Dark Ages was a time of, especially if you're playing it in a fantasy realm. The Dark Ages, not a lot of politics, a lot of just everything was done through force of might. And true, conquest was a large part of medieval society conflict. But actually, so, take a step from history. Look at the War of the Roses. Take at, not everything came down to hereditary kings. Create governmental systems when you're world building that maybe has an election. Because let us not forget, one of the largest empires in history, the Holy Roman Empire, under Charlemagne, had a group of electors who would be the next king, and they would be crowned by the Pope. So Dark Ages does have certain situations. My personal thing to remember is why social situations, what are some of the conflicts? Because, your bashers are always going to say, well, fuck it, I'll kill all the guards. Fuck it, I'm just going to murder all the guards, and then I am king. Or I can get to the evil king and save the princess. There's a very unknown aspect to governance in the Dark Ages, which is protection. Unless your group of heroes intends on protecting the 100 square miles that count ruled, who's going to protect the peasants? Who's going to stop Farmer Bob from stabbing Farmer Jim? Because commonly it's the Count. It's the Count's men who would send him out, and he'd be like, Farmer Jim died. All right, well, you're getting hanged. And now we have to find somebody to take over 2 farms. Why? Because food production is huge in this era. It's huge. Farms are hard. If any of you have ever worked on a farm for even a day, oh my God, it is not a pleasant job. It is a very hard job. It is very physically and emotionally taxing. Okay, I do say emotionally because you just want to cry as you pull another lettuce. But you have to be strong of will to be a farmer. Not everyone can do it. It's cool being in the cities where things are brought to you. So realize for your adventurers, for your warriors, that killing everyone, killing all the guards or all the Count's men has huge, vast repercussions. And what this can do is it's a game that can lead up to a change in your group. So they do murder all the guards, but then they find out later in your game that entire region has fallen into chaos. And trust me, somebody will come in there and they will try to enforce a different kind of order. Whether or not it be roving bands, whether or not it be the peasants rise up and create their own governance, having social implications to your combat is really a cool way to bring politics into the Dark Ages, because now your players were the ones who created it. So you're responsible for that community now. You're responsible to its future because you massacred all of its guards, its protectors. Up to you now. Modern age. Modern age is wonderful. It's actually, if you think about it, most of our days are spent in social interactions. So one of the ways to kind of enforce it is just remember the rule of sound and the rule of populations. The rule of sound is, let's say, for example, I'm playing a vampire, right? I'm going to shoot the prince in the back of the skull. Yeah, he holds his court in a hotel. You fire off a gun in a hotel. Let's just take Chicago for an example. You are going to have the entire Metropolitan Police Department at that hotel in probably 3 to 4 minutes. You're going to have investigators that get involved. You're going to have people looking at surveillance tapes. You're going to have a whole hoopla from one single gunshot. And don't think that the cops don't bring it, because the minute that you fire off a gunshot in a crowded environment, they're going to find you. They're going to work very hard to find you. Even if there is no body, you were the person who shot a gun off in the Drake Hotel. They're going to track you down. So it's very easy to enforce social requirements. It's actually harder to allow for gratuitous violence in a modern age game. because you have to isolate away, because I start banging off rounds, it's going to bring the police. It's going to bring the police, especially if it's in a large metropolitan area. So, really, you have to, it's harder to bring gross amounts of violence to that sort of environment. So modern era, it's kind of easy to bring the social. And I've already done the far future. The far future, essentially comes down to what is the level of law enforcement. And that is how you really judge how much you got to get creative with conflict or consequences. If you got to outlaw a town, there is no law, then you got to get creative with your consequences. If it is a highly structured society like Coruscant, you don't have to get really creative to be like, someone shut off a blaster, they're calling in, I don't know what you call the Coruscant security forces. But even though according to episode 2, I believe, he cut off a man's whatever in a bar on Coruscant. They found the sniper in Coruscant. That was a shape changer. Nobody did crap. I'm just saying. Woo, bless you. So nobody did crap. But if your Coruscant has, local police officers, which I think an advanced society tends to have, law enforcement, go figure. But your weird Star Wars world doesn't seem to have cops.
Well, yeah, I think that a lot of people don't think about this. Is one of the things that you're getting here with Level Up Your Gaming is think about how, when your bruisers are going to just beat the crap out of the merchant, how that affects the world around them. Even in a medieval game, if you're in the middle of a city, a more advanced city, more populous city, if you beat up the merchant, people are going to scream in the bazaar.
Okay? They're gonna go nuts.
Okay, if you do this in a modern game, and going to your vampire example, I mean, vampires don't slum it typically, because you typically have high prestige vampires. They're putting their court in very modern places. This is how vampire is played. It's a very political game, and people who are elite within that circle, they don't want to go hold court in a sewer. They want to hold court in an opulent hotel
where they can get their blood delivered to them in wine glasses. That's what they want. So it's interesting that when you bring civilization to your game, how quickly things can turn from the violent to the political, and how prevalent your social player becomes. Because he will get them out of situations that they cannot get themselves out of when you are involving metropolitan areas. If you are always putting your players in a dungeon,
your social player has no business in a dungeon. I mean, if it's really
unless they want to sit around with their ukulele buffing everyone.
If it's truly a social talker, your social player just does not have in a dungeon crawl, your social player just doesn't have the capability of shining in a dungeon all the time. They have to have an event outside of the dungeon in a civilized area to be able to shine. And like I said, if your players love beating shit up, then dungeon crawls are great. Okay, but
fantastic.
See if you can get them to engage a little bit more in the depth of trying to get a little bit more information, or try to again, we're talking about leveling up your gaming. See if they're willing to invest a little bit in the social aspect of a game.
Bring your dungeon to the street level, and instead of pitfalls, there are traps, and these traps are called people. And they will try to get you to do things. It's leveling up your gaming. Take your dungeon from below, bring it up, and really see how far you can take that. But yeah,
that's
so
beautiful.
that's ending with poetry.
Jared's always good at doing that. But anyways, we're going to wrap it up here for today. Again, you're listening to Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. You can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com, or find us on facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Please subscribe, review, tell a friend, share it with your mother. I don't know. Anybody who might enjoy
listen to our podcast. She does not.
anybody who you might think might find the podcast interesting to players. And we'll talk to you next week. So for Jared, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, guys.
Have a great week, everyone.